Hey, if you work in an enterprise or ever worked in one, you know that you have a SIM or a SIEM or however you want to pronounce it. But I'll tell you what, we're going to tackle that and take a look at the potential for overspending on this thing if it's mismanaged. And I've got two experts who are going to show you how to do this right. Stick around. This is a good one. Hello and welcome to another episode of CISO Tradecraft, the podcast that provides you with the information, knowledge, and wisdom to be a more effective cybersecurity leader. My name is G. Mark Hardy, and today I have Anton Chuvakin and Alex Hurtado on the call. Welcome to the show.
Thank you
Hello
for
there.
having us.
Thank you so much.
So let's think about it. We're talking about the big one, the SIM. Now, first of all, is it SIEM or SIM?
I think the only way it should be called is the SIM.
Okay, Anton?
I am sure there's some kind of Gartner approved pronunciation from 2005, but I just say SIEM.
Okay, so we'll stick with SIM. That's kind of the way I've been calling it all along. It's just like CISO, CISO, and I get all kinds of things like that. It's like, whatever it is you want to use. Anyway, that's not the point of the show is to argue over it, but it's really kind of the heart of a security operations center. The security information event management tool is going to be that big tool, which sometimes you've heard horror stories, 7-figure contracts, implementation timelines that take a couple of years. You go ahead and you bring in all these experts, and finally, you still miss the breach because your license was capped or you went ahead and the parsers are broken, or worse yet, we didn't even have the right people assigned because we spent all the money on the tool to get the work done. Now, let's start out a little bit in terms of war stories. What's the most expensive SIM failure you've ever witnessed? One of you guys jump on it first.
I'll just yield to Alex. She's probably more fun and in this regard, and I'll just do that. I'll go second.
Oh, well, thank you, Anton. Very kind. So for a bit of context, I've been a SIM sort of enthusiast in my whole since I went into the workforce in a bunch of different, almost every possible direction. So I've used it, I've sold it, I've procured it. I've been on the vendor product side of it, and I've also spent countless of hours writing detection content inside of it. So I've watched SIM sort of be SIM, right? In the Fortune 500 world, right, with these 8-figure budgets, and then also in like the scrappy startups that are generating data kind of like a Fortune 500. Well, maybe 200. And so I sort of we kind of have to separate it in sort of like SIM in the enterprise world and SIM in the mid market, right? So I'll start with Fortune 500 world. The most expensive SIM failure I've seen there was more like a priorities failure. So a team spent north of $2 million, right, on the platform, went through the full implementation, right? I remember vividly and almost like viciously, they were so dead set on dashboards. Like that was almost like a big priority for them, like insane priority, which makes sense, right? That's how they were going to show the value of it. And they built like all the connectors going, and they had the typical stack at the time. And then they started with the compliance detections. And then the budget ran out, like after their services engagement ran out. And looking back now, they never built a single custom detection, like in like ever. Like months, even years went into that deployment, and it just became a very expensive like log toilet, pretty much. I've heard it called today something else as well, like a very expensive archive, which is probably a much better put.
Data lake. We like data lake. It
But
sounds so
Data
environmentally
swamp,
friendly.
data swamp comes
Data
out
swamp
sometimes,
is
but I
maybe
think
better, yeah.
I also think not data swamp's not offensive enough, but data toilet doesn't have the scale, so I feel like maybe we should be in the middle.
yeah, well, we're very much like a toilet. Things came in, nothing would ever come out of it, right? Hopefully.
Oh, that is the metaphor. I'm sorry, but we can cancel the podcast because this is the metaphor. The whole stuff comes in and nothing comes out to the toilet. And if something comes out of a toilet, you're in really
You're
big
in
trouble.
really big trouble. Right. Well, it really was like that. Like nothing ever really came out of it except for I guess false positives, right? It was super super expensive. It's very haunting. it didn't end up well at all. And then there was another Fortune 500 as well that had the opposite problem with the budget. Like they had almost unlimited budget, super large bank, let's just be honest, like one of the largest in America. And they were still getting breached left and right. Then the stock that ran that team went on to build their own thing. But yeah, regardless, it's imagine having all the budget in the world or having the budget run out. And I think the point of that was they never really prioritized like detection engineering. It was out of scope of the literal SOW. So that one is very haunting. But on the smaller scale, right? I remember speaking to a team where they were outgrowing their EDR, right? They were generating data enough where they wanted to correlate it, centralize it, right? And they were looking into the open source ways of SIMing, like the Wazoo, the Elastic open source, right? But then they were like, you know what? We also have a bunch of other things to do. We want to just actually ship products. So we want to bank on a startup that was claiming to be a next gen SIEM, claiming to go after positioning themselves as like the next gen SIEM for lean teams, right? Very much going after them. And then a year or 2 years later, I don't know exactly the amount of time, but now they're going end of life. And it's a failure. It's an expensive failure because they probably didn't account for all of the replatforming, right, necessary to get out of that SIM, move on to the new one, start over, right? Because they were really banking on all these, automation, premium price to go with a startup vendor that may disappear, right? There's so much competitive landscape out there in the startup world. Like that's also a pretty big failure. So I've seen it across the board.
I feel like we started. You asked us about the 7-0 budgets and 7-digit budgets, and I'm like, that's not a lot of money. And I think Alex immediately corrected that to be a truly epic failure, it probably would be in the 8 digits. And I think that the 8-digit SIM deals I've seen going back good number of years, and I think that the large enterprise or large government agency with global reach, they were well into 8 digits, and before cloud, that was 8 digits plus hardware cost sometimes in
For
the
sure.
pre-cloud days. So this is, and it is really interesting, and I swear you didn't trick Alex into giving this example, because the story I had in mind, and I am going to obscure probably more details, and I hope it's not the same bank, but it was an example of somebody who had big budget, paid 8 digits for SIM, deployed, and they realized that with 8-digit cost, they still can't quite get the data they need. So they did trim the data. And I mean, in my example, they did do detection, and it really wasn't the problem. The problem was that they consumed a lot of data, but they didn't consume the right data, and they did not have it during the incident. So it was sort of like a 8-digit SIM that failed even as log store. It failed to detect for obvious reasons. It didn't have the data, but also it failed as IR support because the data wasn't there. And it is this happened in the pre-pipeline era, so tools like Cribble or Bindplane and others
You couldn't
weren't
truncate
in
it
place. Yeah. So they had to kind of manually get an axe and cut certain data sets and just basically say, yeah, DHCP, no, we're not doing it. And so the most expensive failure was like they had big budget, spent, did things mostly right, but made a couple of, I'm not even sure, mistakes or oversights or decisions, difficult decisions, whatever you call it. So the data they really needed in the real incident, they did not have.
So it seems like a couple common themes here that we're hearing on these failures. They're not doing good detection engineering, collecting actionable data. And in fact, the idea of all this planning should have been in scope even for the SOW, and it wasn't. And of course, the vendor's like, yeah, we're not going to argue about an SOW that could play in our favor, because we'll very happily sell you an 8-figure product that we don't have to support because you crashed and burned it. However, I think for most CISOs, if they look at this thing and they're like, okay, fine, I've either come to an organization that needs a SIM, or we've grown to the point where we need one, usually about 2,000 users plus or minus if I go ahead and use Carson Zimmerman's figures for that one. but or somehow you're firing a vendor because it just didn't work or a project didn't work. So what do you do? Do you go ahead and pull up the Gartner Magic Quadrant, as you mentioned Gartner before, and we just pick something from there? What's the right way to go about looking for something that's proper for our organization?
Well, my industry peer comes from a Gartner analyst background, so I think it's only fair that you take your first bet here.
Sure. And I'm going to go in a very odd direction. Thank you, Alex, by the way. I lately, one thing that kind of was on my mind a lot is that it so heavily depends on who you are. Because there's absolutely a company that should go to Gartner MQ, open it, look at the vendors, read the report, maybe look at critical capabilities, maybe look at something what more technical teams wrote, create their shortlist. Don't just pick the top right leaders, but basically pick a shortlist from MQ that are reasonably well placed that you can defend against the CIO or CEO asking, and then do an eval and then buy a SIEM. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It is actually okay. But it really depends who you are. If you are a rapidly growing startup in Sunnyvale, you really should not do what I just said. But if you are a mid-sized Belgian bank, you probably should do what I just said. So it's the who question that comes up a lot more to me. And of course, Gartner MQ notes basically say the same exact thing. Don't just buy the leaders. Use this to analyze your requirements. But the chasm between the quote unquote mainstream that should just pick 3 good vendors from MQ, apply them to their realities, and buy whoever comes on top is really not the advice an AI startup in the Bay Area should follow. They may not have a SIEM. They may not have a need for a SIEM. They may use an MDR. They may use something else. They may use a magic AI unicorn. I don't know. The point is that they would not have the kind of a mainstream old world company decision criteria. So I'm simultaneously defending and kind of expressing some skepticism about the classic go to Gartner, pick the leader, or pick several reasonably placed vendors. It is still okay. It still worked. I mean, people, while we can debate beautiful decentralized approaches, people still buy very old world SIEMs, and they are somewhat satisfied in some cases. So this is my kind of half answer, my half. And then
Let's get the other half. Alex, what do you think?
I have a very different answer to that. I think that the category, one I think also Gartner is I think slowly acknowledging too that the category of SIM has evolved. I think past what we all traditionally think it is. To SIM as a verb in the wild is now almost like defined as many different types of deployments deployment way to SIM out there. And I do feel for the buying process and the buying committee and the CISOs out there for trying to navigate and make sense out of all the different approaches out there. Because you gotta really look at a couple different things. Like, do you want to abstract the pipeline right out of the SIM vendor? Do you want to go for that what you said, the monolithic model, all encompassing SIM traditional SIM approach? Or now a lot of more now wide known organizations are bifurcating data, like keeping some hot, sending some to S3. They're now maybe leveraging that decoupled hybrid analytical model. There's now all these new AI SOCs that are claiming to do SIM now as well. Or do you just want to go the platformization route where your EDR vendor is also now wanting your SIM business? Like there's so many ways you can do it. But I agree with Anton in the sense, like, I think you got to look at what you personally are capable or can resource, I guess, like the company size, the maturity, the budget, the team structure. Do you have a data engineering team that can do this pipeline work? Right. Every one of those variables produces a very different answer to what success looks like here. And shamelessly plugging, I have been studying those variables for a long time. I'm presenting something on like the Socratic questioning you should do at your CISO Paradise this summer. So I don't want to give too much away, but I do also want to give Anton the opportunity to eradicate the claim about Gartner. Like, is it true that the SIM players on the Magic Quadrant have to pay their way to be there?
No, obviously not, because the analysts. I mean, it's something that the best answer to this, like, the best answer to this question that comes up is basically in Richard Steenan's book about Up to the Right that he wrote quite a few years back. So the short answer is no, because there are definitely vendors on the MQ who aren't even clients of Gartner at all. So they pay exactly zero. But as Richard pointed out in his book, if the vendor talks to analysts, they kind of like a little bit like people who are married, who they influence each other, even if they don't run influence campaigns on each other. So if a certain analyst talks to a person from big vendor X for the last 8 years, a certain thoughts from vendor X do cross over and lodge themselves into an analyst's head. The analyst will, of course, check it against the facts, what the customers are saying, and it's not about vendor saying, I paid you 100 grand, make me a leader. There's nothing of that sort even remotely happening, but the thoughts do cross over. And that
We're in
influence
constant conversation with them. They have them
through
at top of
constant
mind.
conversation, correct? Like if you talk to somebody for 8 years, some of their ideas will get stuck in your head. You may think of them as your ideas. You may think of them as ideas that are naturally occurring in the sphere, but they are possibly from that vendor.
Yeah.
And when you start balancing criteria, you think, oh, look, there's this vendor that does X, and I think X is a good idea, and they do X. They must be pretty smart. And that cannot not happen.
Okay.
So that is probably the only channel for that. And there are definitely examples where a vendor would call Gartner and say, yo, we pay you a lot of money. Why are we not a leader? And the Gartner is like, sucks to be you. Get lost. We serve the end users. Like, I'm making this up. It's not based on any kind of real story. Well, it's inspired by real stories, but there's definitely no direct money influence. I've lived that life for 8 years, and I know that for a fact. But there is a lot of indirect influence through osmosis, if we have to talk about this.
And let me jump up on that because last year I was recording an episode with Tim Brown when we were at Black Hat, and the question came up. We were off camera, if you will, about that, and I said, "Well, I think I'd pay you to play." And the guy across the table just happened to be sitting there in the media room. Says, "Well, actually, no." And he hands me his card. He's the senior vice president of Gartner. It's like, okay, I'm pretty sure you know the answer. Please tell me. And it's very much along line with what Anton had said. But one of the caveats that I have is that if you look at the Magic Quadrant, completeness of vision, ability to execute, unless you are a Fortune 7 or something like that, you may not need that ability to execute. Unless you're a highly complex, heterogeneous organization, you may not need that complexity of vision. And as a result, you could probably do just fine in one of the other quadrants if we just avoid the beauty contest of getting up there into the upper right corner, because I think what becomes a more important criteria is going to be your total cost of ownership. What's it going to cost me to run this thing over a period of time versus maybe in an initial procurement? And now we have to think about, as you had said, the architecture of it. Do we have a data lake? Do I have to go ahead and store this information? Have I decoupled my architecture? How do all these APIs plug in? How does all the data feeds work? Do I have a cribble? What's going on and things like that? Things such as that. So are there advantages, disadvantages of just focusing on the total cost of ownership versus the beauty contest?
Yeah, I mean, my peer Anton has been very critical of the decoupled approach. We plan to talk about
Very critical is somewhat skeptical. Let's soften it a little bit. I don't think it's wrong. I just don't think it's the future.
I believe the word you used was brilliant or stupid.
Right, with a question mark.
Okay, true.
There was a question mark. I'm going to check that blog, but I need to see if there's a question mark. I'm pretty sure there's a question mark.
Well, I do think that the shift, from traditional SIEMs to the decoupled architecture, leveraging security data lakes has been happening because, as Anton mentioned at the beginning, the visibility is still a constant problem, right? The SOC is constantly put in this data rationing situation where we all know by now. I mean, it's almost like every conference, every website, every startup is saying almost the same thing now, where data is being generated year over year. It's inevitable at that point, and half of it makes it to the SIEM, right? You're compromising visibility because of your budget, right? If I like
Yes.
literally, I've heard that so many times now. Like,
Mhm. Yep.
so we all know this by now. I think it's overplayed, obviously, but at least we're all now on the same page that it's becoming very unrealistic to centralize all that data in one place. Some teams, like as I mentioned before, have the maturity to bifurcate, right? Splice it and dice it, keep some of the data plane in hot and cold, offload it, right? Stuff like that. But the primary advantage, I would say, to the decoupled model, I've been very, very positive about it. In whenever I talk about it, is not just the cost saving piece of it, but just being able to have more coverage without ripping out your current SIEM. Because we all know that ripping out your SIEM, or let's just call it what it is, ripping out Splunk is very, very difficult to do. It's like a 2, 3, 4 year thing, even
Yes.
in my experience. And it's very deeply embedded even outside of the security organization. And so organizations find it comforting that they want to just extend it rather than replace it as like a temporary solution until they're very fully ready to go off of it. So the decoupled hybrid approach gives them that unified visibility, the detection, in some cases now response, right across these both worlds, and you can do multi repo correlations. Like the biggest example is running correlations from Splunk and CrowdStrike FDR data, which is very expensive, putting that in like a Snowflake, right, in a really cheap repo, and then, cross correlating. If you want to stay in the Microsoft ecosystem, do it with Sentinel and Data Explorer, right? Though you're hearing me mention now multiple vendors, right? The disadvantage with that is, uh, the double the vendor management, I guess. Like
Mhm.
it's you're now
Yep.
having to manage the storage layer and the detection, shimming. I love when you and your podcast, Anton, you're like, when you shimmy on top of a data lake. Like
Yep.
I still think about that. That now becomes two layers, right? The analytics layer, the storage layer, two vendors. And in the case of, people like Panthers and Ambilogic, some people, they don't prefer to manage, the storage layer on the customer's behalf. We don't want to manage Snowflake because it's not profitable that way, right? They expect you to manage it yourself. So now that's two vendors, right? There's also the other part of real-time detection. I mean, it's very public knowledge that the data lands in the data lake first. Correlation, scheduling, orchestration happens after the fact. Detection doesn't happen at the time of ingestion. Are you okay with that? Right. That's a trade-off that I guess we need to understand going into it.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
I mean, no, it's such a beautiful intro into the lay of the land. That's been the case, and it's just shifting a little bit. But I want to latch onto one interesting idea that very oddly enough came up in another convo earlier today, and it's still 10:30 here in California. But the idea of the federated or decoupled SIEM being more optimal for transition from an old SIEM. This is something that's stuck in my head as of 1 hour ago, and now you brought this up as well, is that while sometimes people have this vision of like, this is centralized, it's in one big database, I don't know, and this is decentralized when data is everywhere, like that's probably not the entirety of the vision. Some part of the vision is I have tool X, I'm now buying tool Y. Can tool Y read from tool X? Well, when you are in 2009, and if you're buying on-prem SIEM A, on-prem SIEM B, the answer is, of course, no. Data is in an appliance or something very contained. You get one appliance, chuck it out of the window, put another one, and you have it. But when everything is a SaaS and a service, it's kind of nice to keep using SIEM, the new SIEM, but leveraging the data from the old SIEM. That's a cool capability. And that, to me, justifies building some of the decentralized, the federated search features. For the transition support, not for building for the future beautiful decentralized world that may or may not come. Like that's, I just want to kind of hit on that point, because SIEM migration in the old era was hard, but in the new era, SIEM migration sometimes is harder because you can chuck an appliance out of the window or keep it out of support for data storage. But now if you transition from SaaS SIEM 1 to SaaS SIEM 2, you are double vendor managing, but you're also double paying. because you usually cannot move data from SIEM 1 to SIEM B. So this is kind of an interesting side journey that may matter for a lot of people in the audience.
Yeah, that's almost like an egress charge. If I'm going to go
It's like
from
egress for clouds,
yeah,
yes.
from one to the other, and there's a toll booth on the way out, not on the way in. So yeah, we're welcoming you in like California, Hotel California, but if you want to leave, it's going to cost you. So that's an interesting way to collect and retain customers. Whether or not the product or the service is ideal for you, you're kind of locked in from a financial perspective because if you have to make that change, and then the question is, well, what comes next? And then what comes next? If we take a look at it, unless we find that the vendor that we went with 10 or 15 years ago has grown perfectly along with our business and our direction, it means at some point in time we have to kind of face the difficulty. It's almost like kind of choosing a pet rather than choosing a life partner. You kind of hope that somebody sticks around for 50 or 60 years if you're lucky. But as much as I love my little doggy, she's not going to be here in 20 years or 30 years. And so I have to do some changing out. So what do we look for to make sure that either I can transition or, for example, to know that something new that's down there on the RSAC show floor that looks great and the demo runs perfectly because they've got manicured data going in and optimized results coming out. How do I actually give that thing a real live test to make sure it's going to work for me if I'm going to make the payment to transfer from one vendor to another?
You came up with those pretty hard questions, though. Like these are. I mean, I know they're real, but these questions probably won't have the well, let me think. Yeah, just do X. I think these would be pretty deep, and it depends, and where you are and who you are and how much money do you have and how many people do you have and are those really good people. I mean, I'm almost like they may give you a framework as an answer, possibly.
Or do we need a framework? And maybe that's a project.
I mean, let me pick one easy case, and then I'll give the hard case for Alex to answer. How about this? So the easy case is somebody, topic was AI SOC. There was all those vendors, and I was leading some conversation with RSA about it, and then somebody said, nobody with any kind of sanity would buy AI SOC with a contract longer than a year. Like if AI SOC vendor does whatever, like nobody with a semblance of sanity would sign a contract longer than 1 year. And I thought that's very much the opposite of what you want to do with a SIEM, though. Because if you're storing data, you want to try to evaluate something that would hopefully last and evolve with the time. But the short-term thinking is okay for this new tech that may or may not be around in a year or may be integrated in a large vendor. But if you're storing in a centralized or semi-centralized manner, federated plus centralized, you kind of have to think long-term. You're not going to migrate.
Yeah, you don't want to speed date different SIM vendors.
No.
You'd be surprised how many do, because some people want to kind of like the phone bills. They want to buy you out of your old one just to get a new logo, and then they offer you an excruciatingly cheap contract, and then the next year, then they surprise you with the upcharge. But yeah, I've seen a lot of a lot of organizations jump from SIM to SIM because it's cheap to do that. But the egress fees, I mean, selfishly, I think this is even more of a case for the decoupled approach. If you build out your data strategy first, no matter what detection engine on top you want to use, you still have a cost-effective data lake that's AI ready, that's ready for data science, and all of your, and it can expand, right, and it could scale as much significantly better than SIMs. And so I do believe, though, that the modern data lakes have also, I wouldn't say hacked, but they've established some good partnerships too with a lot of the cloud service providers to help like make bridge into like from the cloud service provider data in transit to these data lakes. Like I'm talking like Snowpipe, S3 retention stores, right, have been populated and now into Databricks. But yeah, I do think that it is a silent killer, and it's definitely a question you should ask before you buy the SIM is, what is it going to cost me to get out?
Yep. I mean, speed dating SIMs switching every year makes me kind of really freak out. I have seen some extreme cases, but I mean, I hope it's nobody's hobby because it is just unimaginably wasteful in terms of resources. It's team resources, process re-engineering, workflow. So it's almost like I don't know who's that kind of guy or a girl who makes a decision. Oh yeah, let's switch. Oh, we switched last year. It was fine. Let's switch again. And it's like, oh well, we switched twice. Let's do it again. Like I feel like unless it's an absolute disaster, like if you truly bought something absolutely woefully wrong,
Yeah.
you're not gonna switch. This stuff is really sticky. Again, maybe possibly unlike AI SOC, add-ons to SIEM. SIEM itself, yeah, the moving. I mean, think about the compliance environments, compliant environments when there's a data retention mandate. Like that stuff you can't get out of. You have to keep the old one. What are you going to be paying for 3 SIEMs on the year 3? Like no. But then if you have to keep the data up and the egress is difficult, so I just want to switch to something a tiny bit more practical, right? As far as retention, if you are keeping the data for a year, that to me is still an argument, of course, for liking your SIEM and keeping it. But it's also, oddly enough, one of my counter arguments against federated. Because if you have to have assured retention, how would who and where would guarantee that I will have the data on month 13? Like, I mean, sorry, I'm asking the question ourselves, but yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and you're bringing up some excellent points here because in a way, it's almost as if to say, to avoid being sold something, we want to be buying something. Now, of course, vendors will sell you something, but if we have a purchase-oriented process, I'm going ahead and I'm interviewing the vendors trying to see, do you meet my requirements? Do you meet my checklist and things like that? Which would suggest that I have to have some sort of metrics that I'm going to evaluate them against, but those are also the metrics that I'm going to be able to demonstrate to my management who wrote a big fat check how effective this tool is. Are there good templates for that out there and that aren't just reflective of a particular vendor?
I think Anton really loves frameworks.
Yes, and
You're
that
providing it
became
all
a
the time.
natural. Yeah.
Flick it onto Anton here. There you go.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm gonna start with a somewhat obvious advice that people would hate me for it because I may have given this advice to somebody 10 years ago, if not more, and that's the requirements definition at the early stage. It is really cliche, and people would cringe and make some really annoyed cringe faces when I say that. But ultimately, a fair number of projects and a fair number of those jumpers from SIEM to SIEM are probably are not sure what they're buying and why they're buying it. And it's the classic example goes many years ago. Some CEO I had when I was at another vendor who basically said that people don't take aspirin because they have low aspirin content in their blood. But people do buy SIEM because they don't have a SIEM. And if you ask some buyers of SIEM today why they're buying, they probably, some of them, hopefully a minority, would say, well, we don't have a SIEM, so we need to buy a SIEM. And I'm like, that's totally not a requirement. You can't possibly be thinking about buying a SIEM because you don't have a SIEM. What are you trying to do? And that becomes a pretty painful conversation. In some cases, again, I get some flashbacks to my Gartner days when this conversation kind of happened.
Yeah.
And maybe they said, oh, during the audit, we had this finding we don't have a SIEM, so we are on the market for one. Oh.
Yeah, and
Like,
it's being driven by the
no,
wrong
no.
Driven by
reasons.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah, but something they don't fully understand. It's an externality, and how can you say did they buy right? Well, I guess any SIEM is the right one, right? If they just need to have a SIEM and they don't have one, they can buy anything. They can buy a 10-year-old SIEM appliance, stick it in
Yeah,
a
they're
rack.
compliant. They get a check in
Yeah,
the
they're
box, but
compliant.
it doesn't mean that they're secure. But today, of course, we're seeing things like at RSAC a couple weeks ago, the agentic SOC. Well, if we get into an agentic SOC platform, and I'm able to go ahead and start to automate things where I can use AI for whatever we want to describe AI as my tier one SOC analyst and maybe agentic SOCs to go ahead and do your tier two. Do I even need a SIM, or are these AI tools going to just displace that entirely out of my tool set with something that's a completely different replacement, not an upgrade, but a rip and replace?
So you got to look at the different flavors too, even navigating these new agentic socks. I've seen the flavor of an agentic SOC that is consuming data and is executing on generating detection logic, correlating it, and then providing the alert, then the AI triage, right? But then I've also seen the flavor of agentic SOCs that just consume alerts from everywhere, right? They'll take your
Yes.
SIM, they'll take your EDR alert as well. And I do believe that the ones that do consume the data are probably better off since they have much more context, right, than just the metadata of the rule name that comes, from your SIM. And maybe, it gives you a Claude summary tier 1 analysis based off that alert name and then, a JSON packet. Like I
Mhm.
do believe that does provide more context than those that are just triage only based tools. Plus, I mean, if a product is just or if those agentic SOCs are just consuming alerts and giving you a verdict, can't just like your Claude do that? Like can't just your frontier model just do that? That's any
Yep.
company can build that with a few skills on Claude.
Yeah, and we're getting to the vibe code thing, and of course, the episode that I recorded this morning, taking a look at Anthropic's latest release, and this tool
Uh-oh.
is just
We
too
are veering into
powerful.
dangerous territory.
Getting in, I
Not
know
like
that. That's
it
why I'm just kind
not
of hitting
like
it
it last week.
tangentially.
Uh-huh.
But the idea there is are we getting to the point where, and we've seen this reflected in stock prices with
Mhm.
companies that are software as a service, et cetera, getting hammered. And we're
Yeah.
looking at it because everybody thinks AI is going to replace it. And I was looking at stocks, well, last night, Intuit. It's down over 50% in the past year. And it's like, wait a minute, I've always loved their software. I'm still using some of their tools that I've been using for literally decades. And the answer is, well, could you vibe code that in a weekend? Or could somebody else come up with it? And then what remains then is the stickiness, if you will, of the relationship you have with your customers. And now vendors have to find ways to make that relationship hard to get out of, such as, you have to pay a huge cancellation fee, or you have to pay to pull your data out, or it's only stored in this proprietary format, which is encrypted, and it's going to
Mhm.
require all kinds of processing. Is there a market for the future that says, you know what we really need is a place to put all of your information, run it through Cribble or something like that, so it's all homogenized, and then make it generally available to any tool that you want to select, or a tool that does not yet exist today
Mhm.
but will exist tomorrow, that has no toll barrier on it. Just kind of make sure it's secure so that your opponents can't get to it. Have you seen anybody coming up with a tool like that yet, or should we all go on Shark Tank and pitch it?
But is it what the pipeline vendors do? I mean, I was briefly surprised when, Cribble is, of course, a commercial success. But if you look at the pipeline vendors, there's now a couple of dozen of them. And some of them basically promise what you just said. They promise the beautiful streams of clean data that you can use for any kind of detection, analysis, research. And some of them may deliver, some of them may not. But I feel like it's in the pipeline that exists in the pipeline territory probably, right?
I've seen one. I've seen one that has been as it's the new kid on the block that's I've seen get recommended pretty frequently in the DNR circles. And it's more around, and I truly believe they're becoming very differentiated because there's so much agentic socks out there. I mean, there was literally one that popped up today, uh, and that's where I got the expensive file cabinet reference.
Mhm.
Uh, but there is one that is taking a radically new approach on an inverse index into S3, scanner.dev, and which would avoid the egress entirely. It would avoid the rehydration entirely. I don't know if they do pipeline, quite honestly, but they're claiming to do like petabytes of search in like seconds without all this, rehydration aspect of what you need to do if
Mhm.
you want to query Athena, for example. So I'm looking at them a lot. And because I don't know if you both have read Ross Halleck's article post RSA, his reflections on how like all the like we're all going back to the fundamentals. So since the post Claude boom, using the reference like like the .NET boom, okay. Um, since that, I think everything will point towards back to the availability of the data, how fast you can do it, the speed, the like speed. So that's a player I'm really looking into.
Hmm. I
Yeah.
mean, this fits in the It is really, it's kind of surreal. I mean, it's possible that whoever I spoke with early in the morning watches the same LinkedIn feed, but that's the vendor they mentioned to me. And so it's like, this is kind of getting a weird vibes about the conversation I just had about scanner.dev.
Oh,
And I was kind of curious that it's the distributed, kind of like taking the distributed to maybe another extreme. So I am I am still nervous about the data actually being there. I'm sorry to be like a little old school, but I deal with people who would be really upset if the data for a certain day is missing, but their retention is 3 years. And I'm like, yeah, you have that many petabytes of data stored, and you had issues during some day, and now you're nervous about that. But with a lot of this type of federated searches, it's all luck based. It's all based, the data is either there or not, right? Like
yeah.
I mean,
So
I can imagine searching through petabytes of distributed data in a second, but somebody somewhere paid for the compute you just used. And if it ain't you and not a customer, then who is it? A charitable foundation? Like none of it is free. Somebody's paying for hard drives, as I sometimes joke in this market. Like if you have a SIEM, or if you have a security technology that relies on data analysis, forget SIEM.
mhm.
Data is
Mhm.
stored. Somebody's paying for hard drives. It may be a cloud provider. It may be you. It may be some, I don't know, somebody, but it isn't, and it isn't nobody. So if you search a petabyte in seconds, you used somebody's compute and somebody's storage, right? Who is
And
that
you've hit
somebody?
also on, and this is tangential to this, but it's happening as you get more and more playing around with the tools in AI, and you pay your $20 a month or $200 a month if you're a power user or go beyond. And I have friends who've done that stuff, and they have used thousands of dollars of compute time for that $20 bill. And their thought is that, hey, in the AI world, it's a little bit like the early drug dealers. Hey, kid, try this; it's free. And after they're
Mhm.
hooked, yeah, now you're going to have to go ahead and pay for it. Which, if we think about the directions with these AI driven socks, that they're going to have some amazing capabilities, but as Anton, as you correctly pointed out, they're going to have the cost of doing business. They're going to have overhead that's not going to be easily reflected in a inexpensive product or service because of the ability and then the likelihood of somebody to say, hey, since this is sort of a SaaS version of a SIM, SSAAS, they'll put a lot of S's and A's in there and figure out how to abbreviate that, then maybe I'll just go ahead and do lots of fun queries just to see what's there. And so you end up burning up all kinds of resources doing the security equivalent of watching cat videos.
I mean, same can be said about the tokens, right? Who's paying for all these tokens from these agentic socks?
Yeah,
Aren't they pricing per alert now instead of per GB? And they're saying, well,
they're
we
they're
don't price
they're,
per
they're
GB like all the
They,
changing.
SIMs.
they do price per alert. I've met people who charge you per alert on the intake, which I'm a little freaked out about that, because I'm like, if you have too many, you can't afford them. If you have too few, you don't need them.
Yeah.
Like that's my rehearsed line that I thought about it. And I said, oh, okay, you charge me $10 per alert. If I have 1 million, I don't have 10 million. I already gave some to Splunk. If I have 10, well, I'll just triage them. I don't need you. So is there like a middle category where per alert pricing would make sense? Like, I mean, this just makes me nervous. Like it's everybody love to hate per gigabyte pricing, but I think people are being creative and inventing something that's possibly even more annoying.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking we could keep talking about this forever, but we're getting kind of close to the end of the show.
Uh-huh.
So let me ask you kind of an important question. Is there anything that you had hoped that we would talk about that I didn't ask about?
Oh yeah. I wish we would have talked about the effectiveness, like the metrics, maybe an outcome based pricing model. I don't know. The metrics of how you can ensure the effectiveness of these sims, because we're seeing so many iterations and iterations, different types of sims, but yet they're all claiming to do the same thing as like as a verb, as an output. But yet I feel like no one has kept them accountable
Mhm.
to produce something very nuanced instead of the MITRE reporting, the 90% like coverage,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
MITRE bingo that everybody chases and plays. I recently came across an article, it's fantastic, by George Shen. I'll link it for you guys in the show notes, but he offers an alternative way to basically measure what you don't know you're missing. And basically say, let's stop pretending that you have full visibility and just measure how well the detections that you do have
Mhm.
across a couple different control areas. Like you can do like identity and auth. That's a control area, endpoint, cloud, network, right? And so basically measure the detections that have been like successfully detected at your rules over your detected plus your missed rules under those test conditions. So like if a red team, let's say, runs 20 techniques in the identity and access control area and 15 are detected, 5 are missed, you now have a effectiveness of like 75% within that tested scope. And it's just like testing like a bridge stress test, right? You're not claiming that the bridge can support everything. You're just claiming that, under these specific conditions, here's when the bridge cracked.
And that's a functional thing at Bridge as compared to a different model, which is these guys are selling picks and shovels, and you're the miner, and you go back and said, "This pick isn't a very good one. The shovel isn't a good one. Why? Because they didn't find any gold." Well, it's not the fault of the tool maker. It's the fault of the person doing the wrong thing. So that's one possibility. But Anton, over to you. Anything that you wanted to cover that we didn't cover?
I think that I mean, you can question whether I work for a vendor or not. I report to a Google Cloud CISO, not to the product side. But what I'm going with it is I have a vendor hat. I'm just not wearing it now. And I feel like the desire to figure out what the future is of that technology may not be as easy as a few years ago. So we may be looking at multiple futures. It's possible that federated, decentralized search would find absolutely happy clients, and people will do detection engineering layer that is very storage agnostic, and they would be absolutely happy with this, and they would not want to centralize. And I also suspect that some people would demand centralization no matter what scale. And they would say that if I need to store petabytes, then here's the cache. I'm going to store petabytes. And there would be something in between. I've met somebody, as a funny aside, who is very convinced that agents and AI agents will drive decentralized. But my immediate reaction to this was, it's also possible that agents, with their desire for high quality data, would drive centralized. Because if humans can kind of go and figure it out, it's probably over there. No, it's not there. It's over here. Okay, I got it. Agents may or may not do it in the short term. So they go where the data should be, the data in there, and they make a conclusion without the data. I actually literally have seen that. So I don't know what the future is. It's quite murky, but it's possible that attempts to find what the future is are misplaced, and we need to live in the multidimensional, multilinear future. And the decentralized SIEM is not brilliant or stupid. It is basically one of the choices, and that choice should be there. The heavily centralized should be there. SIEM married to EDR should be there. Look at this. Look, some vendors are selling SIEM EDR combos, and they seem to be quite happy. Their clients are okay. That's a choice. Would I do that? Probably not. I prefer my best EDR with best SIEM.
Yes.
But enough people want to have a combo. So it's probably true that we will have all of the above as the answer.
Well, I guess we'll
It's a
kind
bit
of find out.
boring
Maybe
for a
we'll get back
conclusion,
together.
but that's what I have.
Yeah, well, but maybe we'll get back together in a year or two, and we'll see how these predictions worked out. But thank you very much, Anton and Alex, two really sharp minds who just helped all us become a little bit smarter about perhaps buying and surviving this whole SIM process and things like that, which tends to be, as we had said, one of the most expensive tools in cybersecurity. So, hey, if you've picked up even any useful insight today, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with others. Put it in Slack, put it in LinkedIn. Bring it up over coffee with your friends. And the more we help spread our tradecraft, the stronger we all get, the safer our enterprises and our data become. And if you're getting value for the show, hit subscribe if you're not doing so already, and you'll get more episodes coming your way. We also have a Substack newsletter. We have a great information feed on LinkedIn, so don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn as well, and let other CISOs know where you get your information so they can get theirs as well. So thank you very much. Appreciate you being part of the show. To my guests, thank you again. And to our audience, until next time, stay safe out there.